Welcome to the AIOps Evolution Weekly broadcast. This series features discourse on topics pertinent to the C-level conversation revolving the integration of artificial intelligence into the ever-evolving IT operations landscape. Discover trends and actionable tips for digital transformation, as well as the latest news on how AIOps is transforming business and government operations to create flow in their organization. And don't stay in the dark on the latest industry news. Join the AIOps Evolution community to stay connected and subscribe to the show at AIOPSevolution.com. Now, let's join our hosts, Sean McDermott and Bill Driscoll, IT thought leaders, visionaries, and the voices on the other end of the mic for the latest episode of AIOps Evolution Weekly.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's AIOps Evolution broadcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott, and my co-host, Bill Driscoll. Bill, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Sean. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing okay. It's been an interesting week. I'll be glad when it's over, but I do have Friday off, so I'm kind of excited about that. So
yeah, good. I'm glad our operation isn't dependent on Facebook, so we survived that.
Well, we had a whole discussion. I don't know. I was talking to somebody yesterday about it, and I'm like, is it such a bad thing that Facebook and Instagram went offline for 6 hours? I mean, is that such a bad thing? I think they should go off every week, every Sunday. They should go off just to keep everybody off of social media. But
yeah,
that would.
I'm such a good employee that I didn't even know it was down until the evening. So
honestly, I didn't even know either. Like I found out about it like later on that day. But I didn't know anything about it until I read about it on CNN at like 5 o'clock. And
yeah,
so
well, we're back.
Good. So you want to talk a little AIOps before we roll into the weekend?
Yep, that sounds good.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So a few articles here that you and I kind of put together. Today, the one I wanted to introduce first is from a guy named Matthew David, the man with two first names, and he's with Accenture. And he put together an article. I was actually kind of drawn to this article just because it said the article is 4 key IT operations management capabilities every team should use. Mm-hmm. And I'm always like looking at articles about 4 things you should do, 5 things you should do. And since I'm an IT operations guy, I was just kind of drawn to this headline. I didn't think it really had anything to do with AIOps. And then I started reading it, and it's basically all about AIOps. So that's kind of cool. So, the one thing kind of lead off of this article that kind of hung me up a little bit was this. He refers to ITOM, mm-hmm. And I think of ITOM as IT operations management, right? And because ServiceNow has a platform called ITOM. And, so that's kind of where my head went. So I'm reading this article, and I didn't actually read the definition of IT, of his ITOM, but his ITOM is IT operating model. So okay. I got about halfway through this article, and I'm like, something's not clicking. So I went back to the beginning, and I'm like, okay, it makes sense. So he's talking about a generalized model. But what I thought was interesting is that he basically really focused in on kind of, really 3 or 4 areas. And the first one is AIOps for cross-team collaboration. So basically talking about deploying AIOps across all this, across your organization, which I thought was, we talk about this all the time and all the benefits of that, like reduced mean time to repair, reduced mean time for identification, all the use cases we talk about. But again, really talking about preventing issues, the kind of the standard use cases we talk about. The second thing that kind of jumped out at me is his second one. It's like adopt digital experience monitoring. And this is where I really I actually wanted to spend some time talking about this. And the other 2 areas that he talked about was integrate across ITOM teams and deliver correct analytics. And I think we've talked a lot about both of those. But the digital experience monitoring to me was an interesting area to kind of focus in on, because I think that that's been something that companies have really struggled with since the days of the internet, right? And I remember back in early 2000s when we were doing a lot of work with the first generation ISPs like Digex and BellSouth.net and Ameritech.net, all these .net companies, and which none of them exist anymore, right? Because they all been consumed by somebody else. But one of the things that we talked about back then, and I remember working on a project where we were trying to get the customer to embed um, agents, micro agents into the CDs. So when they install, you remember those like CDs where you install like AOL
Oh yeah.
back in the day?
I'm
Like,
still looking for mine on my laptop.
you get AOL like sent to you like every day in a CD, or you buy a magazine, it's like stuck to the back cover. Like, I mean, they must have shipped out like a bazillion, billions, trillions of these CDs. But we tried to get one of these companies that was doing this to embed this micro agent, so we could actually see the experience on the desktop, right? Because you can't tell. And I think we're still struggling with this today, right? When you're on a Zoom call and you start pixelating, and I'm pixelating, you're pixelating, and I'm like, is it me? Is it you? Is it Zoom? Is it my carrier? Is it your carrier? And now you've got all these people running around with mobile apps, and there's definitely technology now that allows you to put in like micro snippets and things like that into your code to try and track some of this user experience. But I think in the end, this is probably one of the most interesting topics to me, just generally, not just this article. It's how do you measure the customer experience, right? Because there's so many factors to it, and a lot of them are outside of your control, right? So you build a really great application, and it's either a mobile app or a web app, but how they access it and where they're at and what Wi-Fi router they're on, all affects that. But in the end, the customer, they don't care. They're just like, well, this banking app sucks, right?
Yep.
So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. There was general conversation earlier in an analysis we're doing about bottom up versus top down, right? And I think we're shifting this engagement we're doing from kind of a bottom up analysis, looking at all kinds of details about monitoring and process and workflow, and really looking at it, what are the big rocks, and top down. And I think digital experience monitoring, or just user experience monitoring, is kind of the ultimate top-down view. I think a lot of operations management teams you have to do it, but it's, you're caught up kind of working, how do we monitor this device or this router, this firewall, all these different pieces, but it never really boils up and rolls up to the digital experience monitoring. And I think that almost the first thing that customers should try to tackle, as they're rolling out to applications of their users or the third party, is tackling this digital experience monitoring. You kind of have to do it, and almost do it up front, so you have that visibility, and then you can respond to issues that are real and are impacting, and use your other tools to troubleshoot the network, to troubleshoot the cloud, the servers, and then start to incorporate those into the user. So it's really that sort of service first oriented model. How you do it, I'm not going to get into all that here. But combination of agents, synthetic monitoring, transaction monitoring, looking at that level, and looking at observability of applications, I think is kind of key. So, so that's a really important point. I think the thing that really jumped out in this article to me was it was very pragmatic. I think we read a lot of articles out in here that are boil the ocean. I think the next couple we're going to talk about are a little over the skis in terms of where they see things going or where they think things are. But this one, I thought it was very pragmatic. I mean, just applying digital experience monitoring is a must. And then the first point he made was cross-team collaboration. And I think a big focus for machine learning and AI ops has to be to provide visibility and information in an easily consumable way, relevant information to the operators. And if you can do that, you take remediating and mean time to detect, mean time to restore down quite a bit, instead of trying to have very specific targeted end-to-end automations. Focus on bringing that information and visibility to the teams so they can really collaborate. And I thought that was an extremely important point that he was making.
Yeah, I think when you look at this article, and I encourage people to read it, it really, I think you said it's not as boil the ocean. I think it's kind of a combination of both. When you look at the IT operating model concept that he's discussing here, that's really a very strategic kind of big thinking
Mm-hmm.
thing, because it 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 really takes a pretty visionary leader to implement that. But I think that, when you start looking at, I think the concept is dead on for, executive level operations folks, of saying, okay, how are we going to create this operating model, or modify existing operating model into, and what should we be focusing on? Certainly, we're big advocates of AI ops, right? So we definitely
Mm-hmm.
want to have that. This digital experience, I think, is just so critically important going forward, that if that's not part of your overall operating strategy or operating model, then you've got a pretty big hole. How you do it, there's lots of different technologies out there that can help you do it. And there's different technologies on how you're going to do it, and this all boils into a DevOps strategy, right? Because if you can be working have user base, digital user base, monitoring experience
Mm-hmm.
built into your DevOps strategy, then you've got application developers that are developing and running and putting code directly in
Yeah.
there that tie into your monitoring applications.
Yep.
It's all good stuff. So this is a good article. I think people should read it, and you can link to it, here or there. I'm not entirely sure. Like
Wherever it is.
somewhere
Yeah.
along the side. I think this side, and if it's not on that side, it's on this side.
Yeah. Good.
So,
Um, yeah, and
that,
sort
it's either here or there, right?
it's not
So
above or below. It's on
no,
the
it's
side.
not here and it's not there. It's either here or here.
Yeah.
But I highly recommend people. It's a quick read. All these articles are a
Good.
quick read. So
Good.
we will move on. So let's talk about. You had an interesting article that you wanted to bring
Yeah, I
up.
think the last couple articles are really about automation, auto remediation, and it's amazing. The last article didn't even touch too much on that. It's sort of everything's leading to that, but it didn't. That's why I said it was pretty pragmatic. I think automation plays a role, but the title of this article was AIOps tools expand as users warm slowly to auto remediation. And as I read the article, the users warm slowly. Slowly is probably the key word in the title. It was written by
I think
Beth
that's the key
Paraso.
word to IT in general.
Slowly.
Slowly.
Yeah, exactly.
We do
Say it
things
slowly.
we evolve slowly.
That's right. There's a taxi episode about that. The yellow. What does a yellow light mean? Go slow. So the Beth Paraso wrote it
I think
from
we just lost
TechTarget.
half the audience with a taxi
Yeah, we did
reference there.
taxi. Exactly. I was very young at the time watching reruns. But the she uses a couple tools that she kind of highlights. One is Epsagon, one is OpsRamp. Kind of introduces them, some of the new capabilities they have, and then talks about a couple different use cases. So for Epsagon's case, it's with the food services company, and in OpsRamp's case, she actually names the company named Green Pages, which I think is a real company, Green Pages Technology Solutions. So I think there's two main takeaways. One is both of these tools are really focusing on drilling into the innards of applications, of microservices, of containers, and really kind of getting better and better observability, and really investing in that, so you can kind of get better insights down into what's happening in applications, what's happening in transactions, what's happening in the dynamic microservices environment, the compute environment. And so that, those are great capabilities. Those are certainly areas that a lot of these tools need to invest in. But with the article kind of driving towards automation is they found that their overall mean time to restore is going down because they're able to provide better visibility, better insights as to what the real problem is. But both of them say that they plan on looking at automated remediation down the road, taking in those features. Epsagon has an applied observability feature. They're looking at doing that soon. Same thing with the Green Pages and using OpsRamp. They're sort of experimenting with more advanced remediation and evaluating kind of the capabilities. And so I think that's the two big takeaways. Tools are still very much in the collect more information and provide better insights and visibility to kind of suggest to the operators. But we're still seeing actual automation to resolution are still very much in that experimental phase. And because I think there's just so much remediating something, you got to be sure you're remediating and not making it worse. So I don't know. Did you get a chance to take a look at it, John?
I did. I don't really have much to add there. I think what when we say this, we are not endorsing either one of these tools, Epsagon or OpsRamp. And I will make a shameless plug that we are releasing the AIOps Evolution Season 2, which is completely focused every episode on interviewing AIOps platform vendors. So that should be coming out, I would say, in November. So you can actually hear directly from these companies on each one of these platforms. But I think what I would suggest people kind of take a look at this article is really to be looking at some of these numbers. And I'm always big on specific use cases and not just generic things. And the numbers in here are kind of interesting. So when you're looking at your AIOps strategy and trying to articulate what the value proposition is, the more you can find articles like this that have use cases that say, hey, we did this and we experienced 55% drop in mean time to repair and reduced IT interruptions by 35%. These are really good metrics that you can refer to as part of your plan and what you're trying to achieve.
Right. Yep, that's good.
Good. All right. So I'll put that one off to the side. All right. So our main topic of the day is it's called the future of automation and orchestration. And I am, me, I am a sucker for automation articles and automation discussions. We started, shameless plug for myself. We started Real Ops back in 2004, sold it to BMC. It's still called, I think it's called TrueSite Automator, TrueSite Automate, or TrueSite Orchestrator, I think. So we were one of the first vendors in the marketplace around runbook automation, and we actually worked with Gartner and a guy named David Williams over there to create the term runbook automation. So automation is near and dear to my heart. So I find this article. This was an interesting article for me in a couple of ways. It's the aggregation, or it's the culmination of automation, robotic process automation, AI, and ML. So it's like every term right now that I'm interested in one article. So it's like, what's that alphabet? What was that cereal back when we were kids? Like with all alphabets or whatever.
I drawing a blank on that. Yeah, I definitely remember that.
Yeah,
we'll remember it before we get.
We will remember. I'll remember it.
I'll
wake up.
Wasn't now.
I'll wake up to
Apple Jacks.
No. I did eat Apple Jacks, so that was awesome. I'll remember that at like 3:00 in the morning. I'll wake up.
Yeah.
But so, what's interesting about this is that they talk about end-to-end automation. And ironically, I just wrote an article on task-based automation versus end-to-end automation. And I'm not entirely sure if it's been published yet, but if it has, you will find it on one of these sites.
Yeah.
And but anyways, so the first time I heard of robotic process automation, I was kind of confused by that. And what this talks about is automation is the ability to do machine based, to basically automate, actions between machines, where robotic process automation is really the ability to automate the user interactions to a system, almost like keystroke automation. And they talk about something here, which I wholeheartedly agree. When you start talking about automation, it's an end-to-end automation. There's a lot of different steps. There's a lot of groups involved. And even if you're doing automation inside the groups, there could be very long period of times between handoff of one group and pick up by the other group that then may run their own automation. So the key here is to try and orchestrate an entire process. And what he's, one of the very first things he said, which I totally agree with, is these larger automation scenarios require a substantial investment of time, resources, and expenses for proper planning, design, development, testing, and implementation. And I wholeheartedly agree on that. And that's why you don't see as much of this end-to-end automation, is because it does take a fair amount of time. But when you get it right, it can add significant amounts of value to the organization. So I will stop and kind of there and turn over to you, see if you have any comments, but I have a lot more comments on this subject.
Yeah, very insightful comments I have. Now I'll quote. I'll create a quote here. One robot's automation is another robot's orchestration. I think that it's key that orchestration. It depends on what level you're at, right? You can look at any kind of automation we design. Even inside that automation, there's steps that take place that are being orchestrated, right? I think orchestration is the coordination of a lot of different steps of a lot of things that in today's world are really automated. We just assume it was always that way, but at one point that something that is an automation now was done manually before, right? And so I think the big takeaway is I think it's very future looking. I think Itential is the vendor that wrote it is really looking at what the overall vision of kind of things they could do, and I'm sure they're doing facilitating, orchestrating a lot of use cases in different networks and different companies and customers that they have. But I think the real value is in orchestrating, is taking that top level, say what's the outcome, what's the experience based, that we need a customer to get. We need to provide more network connectivity. We need to connect different sites. We need to resolve things that we know are common things that go wrong. And I think orchestrating all the steps and making sure all the systems are updated, the checks are happening, the validations, and nothing's really left undone. I think that orchestration piece is really the real key and the most important part of it. And then I think automation just becomes things that other robots can kind of delegate. You delegate it down to the controller in the SDN or the Wi-Fi router that kind of has its own automation. And so I think working at it, investing in automations being provided by the network providers themselves. And then I think it's very important to have that orchestration tool that you can design the workflow that has to happen between all these different systems.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think there's a missing piece here, right? And by the way, the cereal was called Alphabets.
There you go.
Thank you. You're welcome for that.
I'm going to order that on Amazon right now. Whole Foods, right? I'm sure they sell it.
Yeah, I'm sure they sell it. They sell it in the pumped up sugar section. But the thing is that if you're going to get into end-to-end automation, you have to be able to connect into a lot of different systems.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what we ended up building back in the day. It's a little easier today because there's, most applications have open APIs and RESTful APIs. That didn't really exist in the early 2000s when we did. So we had to build a lot of these adapters to these third-party systems ourselves and test them and things like that. But you still have to have those connections, and you may end up requiring if you're going to do end-to-end automation, and this article is really focused on network configuration and network automation.
Yeah, it is.
But when you start looking at it and you start understanding that the problem can be so much bigger, and you might be pulling in things like information from your DNS system and your IP management system, you might be pulling in network information, you might be pulling in information related to server connectivity and interfaces into that. You may be also looking at firewalls and load balancers. Then you need to be able to connect into a lot of different systems, because you might be using like FireEye or something like that for your firewalls, but another system for network configuration, that you then have to talk to both of them. So I think that there is a missing piece to this, and that's the orchestration layer, and being able to communicate back and forth to those systems. Because if you're going to bring in information and use AI and ML to look at all this contextual information together and say, oh, based on this, we've got to up the bandwidth on this particular interface, then you need to communicate back out to that interface, right? And in order to do that, you're going to have some type of API connection. And it's in the example that he's giving, it's very siloed based into network configuration. So you can have kind of a single API into that. But the reality is, when you look at these end-to-end automation and much broader, you're going to be talking to a lot of third-party different systems if you do it the right way. So that's my only criticism here. And I mean, he does talk about automation, but he doesn't, or orchestration, but he doesn't really kind of address it in the article. But other than that, I think this article is like, I'm just kind of got spread out and I'm looking at it. It's dead on, right? And I'm, I almost look back in time and wish that we still had real ops going today, so we could see what we could do with AI and ML, bringing that into our platform, and being able to apply AI and ML across some of the models that we built, and converting some of the models, the static models that we built, like we built kind of static workflow models, and being able to transform those into AI and ML models that would dynamically learn. That would be super exciting stuff if we still had the chance to do that. But that. So.
Yep. Yeah, and I'd say just to reinforce something you said, I totally agree that you should not invest in an orchestration platform just focused on network, right? I mean, the cloud is showing us that the network, storage, compute, containers, they all go together, right? So orchestration really has to happen at that layer above. I think that machine learning and where that's used is, I think, it could be used in a lot of areas. I think trying to determine what the actual triggering the automation and triggering the remediation is a little dangerous. I think the machine learning is really used in sifting through the data to try to drive and propose, this is probably the areas, or this is probably the impact. But once you sort of have that correlation to say, all right, once this actually happens, I think that's where the automation gets like programmed in. I think driving, I don't think we're seeing machine learning driving remediation yet. I think it's earlier in the process of the detection and kind of figuring out where the problem is.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that there's a lot of organizations right now that when you look at an end-to-end automation, they don't trust it yet, right? Yeah. And their trust is in what I call task-based automation, and he addresses it a little bit in here, where you may have written a script that does something. You may have written 100 scripts that do them. I had a customer one time that wrote over 2,000 scripts, right? And they completely lost track of what scripts were doing what. Yeah. And people were writing scripts that are doing all kinds of things on their network that they didn't know about. So and that's pretty popular in the operations environment, especially at the NOC operator or tier 2, tier 3 support, where they're writing scripts to do things like that. Or if you're provisioning new services, you write a script and not necessarily tell people about it. But yeah, I think we're a ways away. But that's kind of like what I liked about this article, is that it starts kind of opening up the possibilities. And I think that's what IT leaders need to be thinking about when they're thinking about their AIOps strategy, is what does auto remediation look like? And if I put it out 2 years, 3 years, what do we need to do to start implementing some of this, and possibly in a very siloed perspective like this in network configuration? And how can we focus in on that one siloed use case for auto remediation and test that and play around with it and get really good at it, where we can then start expanding it into other areas? And that may take a couple years, but what we're really talking about is AIOps as a strategy. If you have a strategy, you got to have a vision. And this is a good article for people who are trying to figure out how to articulate a vision of the world over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yep. Cool. Good. I think that's a great way to end it.
It's okay. Well, why, are you hungry now for some sugary cereal?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So thanks for coming on, Bill. Or thanks for coming. You're always on. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Windward Consulting Group. You can find Windward at www.windward.com, WINDWARD.com. They're the global leader in AIOps. So you can go to their site and find out all kinds of thought leadership on AIOps and AIOps strategy. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us this week and tuning in. And with that, we'll see you next week. So, Bill, have a great weekend, and I will see you next Friday.
Yep, sounds good. Time to watch Taxi reruns.
Yeah, you go for it. Eating some alphabets. So, all right.
All right. See ya.
All right. Take care. Have a good weekend.
Thank you for joining us in this conversation about AIOps and the future of IT operations. Interested in a deeper dive on these topics? Check out our resources available at AIOpsevolution.com. And remember to subscribe to get the latest episode.